Well, thank you, James and Karen, for coming. What I'm going to try to take care of today is get you guys a better understanding of the requirements around the packaging changes and then what you have to do to meet those requirements. And the way that I'm going to get there is by answering these 4 questions on my agenda. What are the regulations for packaging revalidation? When is revalidation required? How do you perform a packaging risk assessment? Because if you do any changes, you're going to need to do a risk assessment. And then is there any testing required, and what is that testing? What are the regulations for packaging? So currently there are 3 documents that regulate the U.S. market. The 3 documents are the ISO 11607, Part 2, because there's 2 parts to this document. Part 2 is the one that controls revalidation, package process changes, and it's section 5.7. The second document is a TIR 22. This is a guidance document that it helps you figure out how to apply the 11607 document. And so section 13 of that document is what you'll follow for revalidation on that one. And then the third document is 16775, and that's yet again another guidance document, but this one's a little more in-depth. What it actually does is it goes in and it tells you like some forms and steps and all of the instructions actually to help you meet those requirements. Okay, so those are the 3 documents that you're going to want to follow and look at if you're going to do any packaging changes in the market. Okay, the next document is from Health Canada, and the way that that's regulated is the Medical Devices Bureau for Therapeutic Products Division. There's a mouthful. They regulate safety, efficacy of medical devices in Canada. And their document for changes is the guidance for the interpretation of significant change of a medical device. So what that means then is that in this document, they've outlined exactly what they consider to be a significant change and whether or not they've decided if you need to submit an amendment to an original document, notified document, or whether you can just do a letter to file. And then in Europe, this is managed with the EN 868 documents. There's like 15 documents as part of this, and it keeps the first part is actually harmonized with that 11607 document. So that document is actually harmonized with 11607. And so if you follow the 607 document, you're going to meet the EN standard requirements. So that makes it a little easier. So when is revalidation required? You know the standards now. I've given you the standards for 3 different types of notified bodies. The FDA states that any changes made to the device, the packaging system, the process, or the equipment require revalidation. Health Canada goes a little more in depth. They state that a manufacturer must not only just consider the device, but also the impact of the change on the patient and the practitioner. So it's not just the end user, it's the end user in addition to the user. The impact of the change on the specifications of the device, and then also whether that change could reasonably be expected to impact the safety. So that last sentence is very similar to what the FDA is also asking you to follow. So let's talk a little bit about each of the categories that they've itemized as being significant for revalidation. So when would a revalidation regarding a device occur? If you make a change to a physical characteristic, you should look at revalidation. So we've done physical characteristics. Increasing the length of tubing would be a difference of physical characteristics. The second item is in methods of formulation. Whether you change from a polymer to a different polymer, you need to look at revalidation on that aspect also. And then finally, if you look at changing your different components, maybe going to a different component manufacturer, revalidation would be required there for that item. The important part is to make sure that if you make a change, you do look at whether it's revalidating or not. Sterile barrier material is the hot topic right now. Everybody knows that DuPont is changing their Tyvek transition material. And so I'll go into that a little deeper in a few slides because a lot of people usually have questions on that. But if you're going to change your packaging materials from a pouch to a tray, you would need to look at revalidation in addition to whether you're going from porous to non-porous materials or the supplier, such as what DuPont is doing. It's important to note that issues with compatibility between packaging and the materials are taken into consideration the seal integrity. If you make these changes to your material, you need to make sure that you're still maintaining the integrity of your packaging seal so that your sterilization is still good. The next topic is sterilization process changes. If you're going to make a change in the process or the parameters, you're going to need to revalidate. This includes whether you're going to extend or shorten your times. Additionally, anything associated with density or configuration. If you change the density with gamma sterilization, you're going to need to look at revalidating that because the penetration of the gamma will not be the same. Additionally, the same is for ethylene oxide with its penetration qualities. If you change how much more product is in there, you won't be able to claim the same SAL levels. This is where we lead into the extension and reduction of exposure time. If you're changing those sterilization assurance levels, you need to make sure that you're revalidating and then submitting those changes. The fourth item is quality control verification, and that is when during the manufacturing process, you find that the acceptance criteria that you have in place isn't meeting your needs, and so you decide to make a change to a different type of acceptance criteria. If you make that change, it's important that you recognize whether it has an impact on the device, the safety or the efficacy, and if it does, that you document and submit that. So we can talk about equipment changes. This is a very common revalidation question. If you're as your business expands and you bring in new equipment, you obviously have to go through the normal processes of validating IQ, OQ, PQs. But what about if I do a transfer? If I buy new technology and I want to shut that facility down and bring it over to where we currently have our facility, do I need to do a revalidation? The answer is yes. Something even as simple as moving from one location in a room to another will also require revalidation. The reason being is that if it's in a like over there, let's say that I had a sealer over in that corner of the room and I wanted to move it over to the other side of the room. I don't know that the airflow over there or the power over in that corner is going to be reflective of exactly what's going to happen in that side of the room. So I would need to do some revalidation testing to make sure that I can continue to get the same quality and device from that move. So that a lot of times people think that I'm just moving it within the same environment, so I really don't have to do anything. I could just justify that everything is the same, but it's not correct. You do need to have some type of evaluation and test data. The last item is routine maintenance, and this actually happened to a company which was actually unfortunate. It's a big facility, and they have a large packaging system. And what happens is that they chose one day a year to do routine maintenance. And so the employees take the day off, and the maintenance team comes in and they rip apart all the equipment, do all the required maintenance, put it back together, and do a quick test run to make sure everything's working. And then the next day the workers come back. They start running actual packages through. Well, all they did was routine maintenance. But what they found when they started doing some of their in-process verification checks was that one of those routine maintenance changeovers was actually a significant change and actually changed the seals of their packaging. They were no longer able to test and pass the seal strength values that they were setting up their acceptance criteria for. So it's important to be thinking about things like other departments, not just those in the process and the quality end of it, but also like your maintenance team. They make these changes, and they don't think about what this could do to impact, because all their job is to make sure that you guys can still continue to run. And so there's just a disclaimer there to watch out for routine maintenance. So I added these three topics, even though they're not listed specifically on the FDA's quote as possible changes. They are things that drive changes, and customer complaints is the biggest one. Many times you'll get your product, you've validated it, you're getting it out in the market, and then you're starting to get feedback, and your seals are not strong enough, or maybe they're too hard. I can't open your package, it's too difficult. Can you make the seals? Any type of changes associated with customer complaints or customer feedbacks usually end up going back to design. And so it's important that you pay attention to those, because they would also require revalidation. The next process is non-conforming product and recalls. This is the FDA's number one issue with going and looking to see if you did do your revalidation. They'll get complaints out in the field that there was particulate matter in your product. A lot of times people will do these complaints. You file complaints with the FDA. You can go on their website and you can see if you've actually looked at the majority of the recalls. They're usually driven because there's particulate matter or the device protruded through the seals. So you end up actually going back to the design process to fix these, and that's where the revalidation comes in. Okay. Maybe. Lucky. So the third item, is negative trends in quality or process controls. Sorry about that. It's kind of funny. If you're manufacturing your product, you'll see a shift in possibly your seals. Maybe it will shift high, or maybe it'll shift low. What you want to be careful of is that operators don't think that it's okay just to adjust the equipment. A lot of times they'll think that they're doing the right thing, but in actuality what they're doing now is shifting you or adjusting you outside validated parameters, and now you have non-valid products going out to the market. So it's important when you do your validations to make sure that you cover wide ranges for those types of things. If you do decide that you're going to remove some type of inspection criteria as part of this process, you are required to notify the FDA and Health Canada about those types of changes. They take those into consideration when they are giving you acceptance to sell your devices. And so if you make those types of changes, they don't like it. And The intent of validations is not to deceive the FDA, so by keeping them in contact of the things that you're doing is always a good thing. So we've identified that we've gone through the standards that regulate the industry, what constitutes a change. So now let's get into what do we need to do to perform a risk analysis. And this is actually the easiest part. It's determining whether or not the change is worthwhile is not hard. So the FDA's QSR states that you need to conduct a risk analysis to determine if, one, you do a letter to file, or two, you need to perform a regulatory supplement. And the way that they've made that decision for you is that any change or modification in the device that could significantly affect the safety or effectiveness of the device, for example, a significant change, modification in design, material, chemical composition, energy source, or manufacturing process. So, for example, if you're changing from a battery-operated device to a plug-in device, that's considered a significant change that would require a supplement. A major change or modification on the intended use requires a change. As part of the risk assessment, you're going to implement your change control procedures in accordance with the regulations. This means to document why you made that change. What testing did you do to support that change? And how was the device impacted? You're going to document any of these activities associated with that change up to, but not limiting, to the device master record and then your rationale for acceptance criteria. You're going to evaluate the impact from that change to the packaging and then any other possibly affected systems. So even though my focus today is only on the packaging changes, it's important to recognize it can have an impact on your sterilization. It can have an impact on your processing. Depending on whether you file a supplement or a letter, these following items will allow you to meet that need. If you're going to do a letter, a simple literature review will work. If I'm changing from a polymer to an equivalent polymer, there's enough literature out there that you can just grab that literature, put it in your device master record, explain why you chose what you did, and off you go. If you want to use a letter from a subject matter expert, now, these are actually something new that the FDA is actually starting to accept now. If you can reach out to a possible doctor or an engineer, it's important that what you're asking from them in this letter is a device testimony. You're not asking them for their opinion, but rather evidence that the change that you made has no impact on the safety or efficacy of the device. And so, a lot of more of these consultants are coming out there now and providing these subject matter experts so that you can just do letters to file. And if in any of these cases you can't do these two, you can always do additional testing. Those would be considered significant changes enough that you would have to do a revalidation. And the reason why is because you're having an impact not only on the configuration of the packaging, but also on the sterilization. Going from a double pouch to a single pouch, and if I'm using ethylene oxide, that gas is going to get into that packaging a lot easier. But going in the other direction, from a single to a double, there's a second barrier now, and so that's going to be a little more difficult to sterilize your device. So each of these would require revalidation and supplements. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Tyvek transition that's going on. Nelson Laboratories was the laboratory for this testing. DuPont has announced that they will be replacing their Tyvek, which they're calling Legacy, with transition material. The reason they're doing this is to keep up with the technology that's out there. The manufacturing is changing. They're going from a 3 spinning head process to a 5 spinning head process. It's important to be aware of this, that they are including 7 regulatory bodies as part of their equivalency study. So they really reached out to worldwide notified people and said, okay, we're making this change. We want to make it as easy as possible for our end users. What do we have to do to help them out? So, good news, as of September 2015, they did receive FDA equivalency. What that means is that they've performed the appropriate testing to demonstrate that the new material is equivalent to the old material. So, what does that mean for you guys? Do any of you guys use Tyvek as part of your product? You do, okay. So, does this impact your change? Does this change impact your device? It will, right? You can't just take the letter and file it away. The courses of action are, if you don't use Tyvek, then there's no further action. You don't have to do anything. If you're going to use Tyvek transition on non-sterile devices, it doesn't matter because this really only applies to sterile devices. And then finally, you can choose to accept what DuPont has done as part of their testing, or you can perform additional testing. So those are your 4 choices. Yes? The question is, do I have to get a hold of their testing? So what they did was, for the members that participated in the test, they're going to actually give them, they're going to actually give them a full report. They've done testing that they will put out in, you know how they have a technical specification with all their information? So they will publish that also on the new Tyvek. And then also you can get the letter off of the FDA. So all 3 of those things will allow you to do your risk assessment. So like I was just saying, most companies will do just a letter to file. It's just an equivalency letter. The one thing that you will have to do, especially if you do ethylene oxide sterilization, because they did not evaluate residual levels. That is very specific to each manufacturer, and so you will need to do residual testing. You will also need to look at the flow. So whether your D value for your sterilization method is still valid. Health Canada has come out and very boldly stated that if you use ethylene oxide as your sterilization modality, you will be required to do residual testing before they will allow you to sell your product. So if you are selling in Canada, you should get a jump on this. The problem, though, is that the current material is available. The new material is not yet. A lot of people are having a hard time getting this new transition material so that they can do their testing. So the original cutoff date was September of 2015. Now they've extended it to December of 2015, but they're still getting a lot of complaints. They can't get the material. What are we going to do? So they changed the date again. Now we have until June of 2016 to do any evaluations on that material that you need to do. And I know that if June comes around and people aren't ready still, I'm sure that they will change that again. It's because it's kind of like when a hurricane comes through, everybody runs to the store and buys everything. That's what they saw, a significant increase by people that use the material, more so than they've ever done. And so they're just, it's hoarding, is my understanding. Yeah. Yep. So, but they will get there. They're working really hard to make sure that you can get what you need. What do I do if none of my testing was captured as part of that test and equivalency study? Am I hosed? No, I'm not. The testing that they chose to do is in compliance with the ISO 11607 document. And that document has options for testing. And so all you'd really have to do is a justification stating that the test that they chose is equivalent to the testing that we perform, and just do a letter to file. So I've decided I need to do testing. What kind of testing do I need to perform? Do I need to do equivalency testing or revalidation? Those are two very different tests, and one can be super, super expensive and include a lot of time, and the other stuff is a lot faster. So if the change has an adverse effect to the product, then you need to revalidate. If you don't pass your equivalency test, then you need to revalidate. So pretty much if it goes bad, you should revalidate. And when you're asked to revalidate, what am I doing? I am going back to the original testing that I performed and ensuring that the same tests that I did then, I do again. I want to make sure that I do the same testing, just because why would you want to change it? What are you trying to hide? So those are the kinds of questions that start to come up, the flags that the FDA starts to ask if you don't just repeat everything exactly the same. So at our booth, we have this really cool slide ruler. Yeah, they can stay down there now. And the way that it works is we put this together to help out engineers that are doing these revalidations and these validations. They look at compatibility between material and sterilization, and they identify, based on our recommendations, which test method is the most successful with the combination that you use. So if this is something that you'd be interested in, they're over at our booth. Come grab one. They're super fun. Okay, so I've done revalidation. I don't need to revalidate. I've decided that the change is not significant enough for me to have to do everything. I'm just going to do an equivalency test. Equivalency test is a comparison between the original data and new data. We use a lot smaller sample sizes with respect to this, and it goes a lot easier. You're just doing an apples-to-apples comparison to make sure that there's no statistically insignificant difference. You do your testing, and then you just file it away with your letter into your document DHRs. Now, the one thing that you need to know is, what if the FDA comes in and says, you know what, we decided that you don't have enough of a justification to just do a letter to file. Well, you're good to go, right? Even though you did everything that you're asking, you just pack it up, that little information, send it off as a supplement. So the FDA understands at that point that you're not trying to hide anything. You have done your due diligence, you've done your justification, you've done your testing, you already have everything. You just need to file it to them. So, and they really like it when you do that. Important notes, when you're doing these revalidations, it's important to make sure that you're doing periodic reviews. It's not just revalidate and you're done. What actually happens over time is that people start to make these little changes here. I want medium blue dye, this guy validated dark blue dye. And then another engineer changes something else, and another engineer changes something else. But what happens is all these minor changes actually become very significant. And so By doing periodic reviews and evaluating your packaging that way, you're assuring the FDA that these changes are not significant. Additionally, make sure that these are being evaluated for risk. It's not enough just to say that we looked at them, but whether they were risk associated. So, after all that technical difficulties, my conclusion is that whenever you're doing revalidations, it's always important to take a conservative approach. We have to remember that the patient is the end goal here. We're trying to save their lives, not contribute to the issues that they're dealing with. And with any change, document, verify, and authorize.